5 children vanished into thin air, consumed by a raging fire, yet leaving not a single trace behind. No bones, no fragments, no evidence they were ever there. What kind of fire leaves no ashes of its victims? And what if the fire was never meant to be the end? If you woke up to your home engulfed in flames, and your children were gone without a trace, how far would you go for the truth? Tell us in the comments below. And if unsolved mysteries and chilling true crime stories haunt your thoughts, make sure to subscribe to Host of Silence, so you don't miss a single shadow. To understand the terrifying truth of what happened on that silent Christmas night, we must go back to 1945.
Fayetteville, West Virginia.
Christmas of 1945. The eve was bitterly cold, but inside the Sodder home, a vibrant warmth defied the frost clinging to the pine trees outside. The residence, a sturdy 2-story wooden structure, was the heart of a large and prolific family. George Sodder, at 53, radiated the solidity of a man who had built a modest empire from coal transport, his backbone forged by decades of hard work. Jenny, his 42-year-old wife, was the embodiment of tireless grace, her hands never still, her spirit the glue that held everything together. Together, they had raised 9 children, each one a star in their familial constellation. Christmas night was in the air, promising the miracle of morning. The house echoed with the cacophony of young voices, laughter, and the rustle of hidden gift wrap. John, the eldest son at 23, helped his father in the business and had returned home, his calm, mature presence a counterbalance to the energy of his younger siblings. George Jr., 16, and Marion, 17, were bursting with youth, their whispers filled with plans and adolescent dreams. Maurice, 14, and Martha, 12, were engrossed in a board game in the living room, their mild disputes a familiar soundtrack. Louis, 9, immersed in his secret diary, barely noticed the commotion. Jenny, 8, gentle and affectionate, nestled near her mother, while little Betty, 5, the youngest of the brood, radiated pure joy, her imagination already dancing with the promise of dolls and sweets. Sylvia, just 2, the baby, was the point of sweetness and vulnerability that kept George and Jenny perpetually alert. The nightly routine unfolded with its familiar rhythm. One by one, the children climbed the creaky stairs, their footsteps fading as sleep embraced them. The 5 youngest, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were directed to the second-floor bedrooms. John, George Jr., and Marion also retired to their own spaces, spread between the second floor and a converted attic area. Marion, however, had plans for a brief visit to friends, a small childish secret she hoped her parents wouldn't notice. Sylvia, worn out from the day, had fallen asleep on the downstairs couch, her tiny form curled under a soft blanket. George and Jenny remained in the living room, the fireplace's light dancing on their tired but content faces. They whispered together, plans for Christmas morning filling the air with sweet anticipation. The scent of pine and cookies still lingered, a sensory memory of the joy that had filled the day. The quiet of the house, around 12:30 a.m., was broken by a sharp thud on the roof. George Sodder, stirred from light sleep, pondered the sound. Maybe a log rolling off the chimney, or a squirrel. He turned over, sleep pulling him back. But Jenny's ever-vigilant mind sensed a discord. A subtle smell began to seep in, something metallic, burned. Anxiety scraped her throat. By 1 a.m., the smell was no longer subtle. It was pungent, thick, and she shivered as she woke George with an urgent touch. He rose, muscles still heavy with sleep, and went downstairs. His initial inspection of the ground floor revealed nothing obvious, no visible flames, but the air seemed to vibrate with an invisible threat. Frustrated, he returned to bed. But the smell was now undeniable. It burned in his nostrils, a dark omen.
Suddenly, a flickering light danced on the bedroom window, a flaming shadow.
Dread chilled his blood.
Terror rose, fast and unforgiving. The house was on fire.
The fire, later discovered to have started near the family's fuse box on the ground floor, exploded with unexpected fury. George Sodder roared, a primal scream tearing from his throat, cutting through the night's stillness. Panic became a living entity, gripping them with iron claws. Jenny's first instinct was for Sylvia, still asleep on the living room sofa. George, surprisingly agile for his age, grabbed the little one, lifting her to safety outside, where the early morning air was brutally cold, but the searing heat of the burning house was infinitely more terrifying.
John. George Junior.
George shouted, his voice hoarse, trying to be heard above the roar of flames now licking the outer walls. Chaos reigned.
Thick, shocking smoke belched from windows and doors.
John, awakened by his parents' cries, stumbled down the stairs, his body sluggish from sleep but propelled by survival instinct. George Jr. followed close behind, coughing convulsively, his face already smudged with soot, urgency blazing in his eyes. Marion, who had just returned from her visit, saw the infernal glow of her family's home from afar, a beacon of horror in the darkness. A tight knot of fear clenched in her stomach as she ran, her mind already spinning with the need to seek help, to alert the sleepy neighbors. At least she was safe outside. With John, George Jr., and little Sylvia now trembling beside them on the frozen grass, a chilling realization, colder than the December air, struck George and Jenny like a punch. 5 children were still trapped inside that inferno.
Maurice. Martha. Louis. Jenny. Betty.
Their names, once whispered with love, now cried out in desperate pleas, silent screams lost to the hungry roar of the flames. The second-floor bedrooms, where the youngest children slept, had become furnaces, windows exploding in torrents of molten glass, each opening a fiery eye watching the despair. A father, crazed by love and horror, George Sodder made a frantic attempt to re-enter. The main staircase, the only passage to his trapped children, had already become a shaft of fire, the wooden steps collapsing in a vortex of flame. He ran to the side of the house, eyes burning, searching for an alternative, any way to reach them. There was a ladder, a sturdy 40-foot wooden ladder he always kept propped against the side of the house, essential for maintenance and repairs. It was missing. Not blown by wind, not obscured by smoke, simply gone from its usual spot.
A chill coldé den winter, a terror defying logique, pierstis des pères.
That was not possible. Desperate, George turned to his 2 coal trucks, parked just yards from the burning house. They were the backbone of his business. Powerful, reliable vehicles, never once failing him. He jumped into the cab of the first, turning the key in the ignition. A weak cough from the engine, then silence. Nothing. He tried again, and again, cold sweat pouring down his face. Dead. With a cry of frustration, he leapt into the second truck.
The same stillness. The starter groaned lifelessly, a hollow sound in the unfolding nightmare.
Those trucks, his workhorses, were like extensions of his will. Now they betrayed him in his darkest hour. A paralyzing helplessness wrapped around him. As George fought the inexplicable, Jenny, her legs leaden, ran to a nearby neighbor's house, her chest aflame, her mind a whirlwind of prayers and panic. She begged to use the phone to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, just 2.5 miles away. The phone was dead. No line.
No dial tone. Absolutely nothing.
A line that had worked perfectly hours earlier now silent, as if cut, further isolating them in the darkness of their calamity. The succession of unbreakable obstacles, each one a slap to logic, began to coalesce into a sinister pattern. The Sodder home, once a sanctuary of family life and joy, became a skeletal silhouette against the pre-dawn sky, collapsing rapidly upon itself. The fire, swift and ruthless, devoured wood, plaster, furniture, and the memories of a life. The cries of the missing children, if they existed, had long been drowned by the insatiable roar of the blaze. George, Jenny, John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia stood frozen, in shock, their faces lit by the terrible glow of hell, the heat searing their skin, but the chill of an unshakable suspicion forming in their hearts. The inexplicable disappearance of the ladder, the incomprehensible failure of the trucks, the dead phone line, these were not mere coincidences on a night of tragedy. They were the first disturbing whispers of a darker, more malevolent truth, igniting a horror that would transcend the mere destruction of a home. Christmas Eve had become a nightmare, and the nightmare was only beginning. The midnight air was thick with the acrid scent of tragedy. Dense, oily smoke still spiraled lazily from what remained of the Sodder house, a charred skeleton of timber and shattered dreams. The chill of the night, promising a frosty dawn, couldn't dissipate the residual heat emanating from the smoldering ruins, nor the terror that had rooted itself in the hearts of George and Jenny. Standing at a distance, clutching 2-year-old Sylvia, they watched, motionless, as their world turned to ash. The silence that surrounded them was louder than any scream, a heavy shroud of disbelief and despair. The arrival of the firemen, though late, brought a false sense of relief, quickly replaced by bitter helplessness. The small fire truck, with its weak pump and a hose that looked far too thin for the scale of devastation, struggled against flames that still licked at exposed beams and the last remnants of the roof. Neighbors who had come running to help now stood back, their faces lit by the flickering glow of headlights and the dying fire, reflecting the same paralysis that gripped George and Jenny. Water hissed onto the embers, turning red and orange into dense, suffocating steam. In 45 minutes, the inferno had been subdued, reduced to a twisted mass of blackened debris and smoke that would linger for days, scarring the landscape and their souls. The promise that the search would begin once the heat subsided was a small flicker of hope in the abyss of grief. George, his face smeared with soot and dried tears, clung to that promise with desperate ferocity. The thought of finding any trace of his children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, was the only thing preventing him from collapsing entirely. Jenny, pale and glassy-eyed, stared at the mound of ashes, feeling a cold that came not from the air, but from the profound uncertainty gnawing at her soul. Even amid the pain, logic began to whisper its first unsettling questions. With the pale light of dawn, the scene revealed its full brutality. What had once been a vibrant home, full of laughter and life, was now a dark wound in the earth, marked by charred wreckage. Firefighters and a few volunteers, with shovels and rakes, began the grim task of sifting through the remains. Every motion was slow, heavy, steeped in solemnity. George and George Jr., who had fought tirelessly during the blaze, watched intently, eyes fixed on each burned plank, each heap of ash, searching for the impossible. Hope dwindled by the minute, replaced by a growing sense of unreality. The search went on for hours. The sun rose in the sky, dispelling the night's cold but not the chill that ran down every spine. The stench of smoke lingered, soaking into clothes, hair, and memory. Every shovelful that dug deeper into the ashes unearthed only more wreckage: melted dishware, twisted metal, unrecognizable fragments of furniture. The hope of finding something, anything, that could confirm the children's presence upstairs at the time of the fire turned into a paralyzing horror. The firefighters, men accustomed to death and destruction, began exchanging troubled glances. The total absence of evidence was disturbing. Hours stretched into a torturous eternity. The fire chief, a heavy-set man with a face etched by fatigue, approached George with an expression of sorrow and confusion. His voice, when it finally came, was hoarse, almost a whisper. He couldn't hide the fear in his eyes as he reported the terrifying void the search had uncovered. No evidence of bodies. Not the smallest bone fragment, no dental remains, nothing that could indicate 5 children had died in that inferno. It was as if they had been vaporized, vanished without a trace. The official explanation, delivered with forced certainty, was that the children had been completely incinerated, an idea George and Jenny, in their shock and grief, simply couldn't accept. The human mind, even under the weight of profound sorrow, seeks logic, and the logic screamed of impossibility. George staggered, the ground slipping beneath him. His children, reduced to nothing? His mind rejected the absurdity. Jenny felt a cold wave of denial. The image of the burning home, of George's desperate attempt to climb a ladder that wasn't there, of the dead phone line that prevented a rescue, all swirled in a storm of unanswered questions. How could 5 human bodies, with bones and teeth, simply vanish without a trace? Even the most furious fire couldn't perform such a miracle of total annihilation. The official version, quickly cemented and repeated by local authorities, was that the children had perished in the fire and their bodies had been entirely consumed by the flames. This conclusion, presented with irritating certainty, ignored the obvious anomalies that George and Jenny tried desperately to highlight. George, his voice trembling with grief, explained to an officer that the phone line had been cut before the fire could have reached it, preventing any external call for help. The wire, which should have remained intact, had a clean cut, as if made by a tool. The officer listened, but his gaze drifted, as though the information were just the ramblings of a grieving father. George also mentioned the ladder, the same one he always kept beside the house, which was inexplicably missing that night. It was his only way to access the second floor through the window, his last hope of reaching his trapped children. He had run to get it, but it was gone. He described its usual place, the unchanging routine, the impossibility of it simply vanishing. The officer, without even glancing at the wreckage, murmured something about panic causing confusion, or perhaps the family had moved the ladder earlier, an explanation as simplistic as it was dismissive. George's frustration was palpable, a silent scream lost in the air thick with ash. And then there were the trucks. George's coal trucks, always reliable, the backbone of his livelihood, refused to start that night. 5 trucks, all rendered useless, preventing George from using them to reach the second floor or rush to town for help. He tried each one, their engines offering only weak protests. It was an inexplicable failure, a disturbing coincidence. Authorities dismissed the claim as a mechanical issue, perhaps due to the cold, never investigating the strange synchronicity. With every anomaly he pointed out, George felt an invisible wall rising between his truth and the official narrative, a wall built from indifference and disbelief. Jenny, more restrained in her grief than George, felt the same indignation swell in her chest. The authorities' rejection of obvious clues insulted her intelligence and maternal instinct. She spoke with a neighbor, an elderly woman who lived a few houses down, a light sleeper who'd observed strange activity on their street. The woman had seen unusual lights around the Sodder home the night before the fire, figures moving in the shadows, a car she didn't recognize parked briefly on the road. But her testimony was dismissed, chalked up to an overactive imagination or the confusion of old age. No one made an official record. She was politely, but firmly, sent away. This negligence, this refusal to consider anything outside the convenient story of an accidental death, lit a flame in Jenny's heart. Her grief now mingled with indignation, fueling an unstoppable drive to find the truth herself. The idea that her children had been reduced to nothing, without a single trace, was an affront to her understanding of reality, a violation of nature itself. She refused to accept the impossible. Days turned into weeks, and her pain hardened into unshakable conviction. While the world seemed ready to bury the case with the house's ashes, Jenny Sodder could not rest. The image of firefighters combing the ground, their shovels returning empty, haunted her days and nights. The total absence of bones or teeth screamed for explanation. The official acceptance of complete incineration, convenient as it was, defied basic logic. Driven by an urgent need to disprove the official story, Jenny conducted her own rudimentary experiments. Her home, once a warm haven, became an improvised laboratory of pain and truth-seeking. She collected animal bones from local butchers, chicken, pork, beef, vaguely explaining she needed them for cooking experiments. With methodical coldness, she prepared bonfires in her yard, trying to replicate the conditions of a house fire. The smell of burning flesh and bone filled the air repeatedly, a nauseating echo of the tragedy. Jenny watched the flames consume the bones, the intense heat licking them relentlessly. Flesh carbonized quickly, but the bones, even after hours of fire, remained intact in their basic structure. They darkened, became brittle, but never vanished completely. She stirred the ashes with a poker and always found fragments, however small. Teeth, even more resilient, remained nearly untouched, only blackened by soot. She repeated the experiment multiple times, varying intensity and exposure time. Each painful test solidified her certainty. Even the thinnest bones persisted. The conclusion was brutal but undeniable, confirmed by the primitive science of her own backyard. It was absolutely impossible for 5 human bodies, with full skeletal and dental structures, to vanish without leaving a single trace in a house fire. The temperatures required to reduce human bone to dust were far beyond what even a large residential blaze could produce. With each experiment, Jenny's resolve burned brighter. Her pain became a driving force. The authorities' denial and insistence on the official version were no longer just frustrating, they were evidence of something darker. Her children weren't in the ashes. They hadn't been consumed by the fire. The hard truth was that they had not been in the house when it burned. The question that haunted her now was no longer how they died, but where they had gone, and why. The silence of the ashes had become a voiceless scream of hidden truth. And Jenny Sodder, heartbroken but clear-minded, was ready to uncover it, no matter the cost. The silence that settled over the Sodder house was not one of resigned mourning, but a heavy void, filled only by the echoes of unanswered questions and the persistence of an almost insane hope. George and Jenny, as the days dragged into weeks, refused to accept the official narrative. Death, to them, had not manifested in a convincing way. Their children, they knew with a certainty that transcended reason, had not perished in the flames of that fateful Christmas. The absence of any physical trace, of bones, of teeth, of any remnant of what had once been flesh and blood, was a screaming anomaly, a cruel paradox that the cold logic of science seemed to confirm, but which the local authorities refused to confront. Jenny Sodder, a woman of strength and unshakable determination, was not content with superficial statements. The deep pain she carried was channeled into a personal, methodical, and exhaustive investigation that would take her to the edges of the forensic knowledge available at the time. She spent days, nights, and weeks immersed in correspondence with the most renowned crematoriums in the country. Her letters, written in firm handwriting despite trembling hands, detailed the fire, the intensity of the flames, the duration of the inferno that had consumed her home. She asked tirelessly what would remain of a human body under such conditions, seeking the truth that the town of Fayetteville seemed so willing to ignore. The responses she received were unanimous and disturbing. Cremation experts, with decades of experience reducing bodies to ashes, explained patiently that even at the most extreme temperatures reached in crematorium ovens, far higher than those of a typical house fire, it would be impossible for a human body to disintegrate completely. Bones, especially the larger ones like the spinal column and skull, would resist. They would fragment, yes, but not disappear. Small fragments, teeth, even slivers of bone would always remain. The intensity of fire in a residence, no matter how violent, would not reach the level required to vaporize human bones. The total absence of any skeletal remains from the 5 Sodder children was, for these experts, an unprecedented mystery, a fact that defied the laws of physics and biology. Jenny received these letters, one after another, and felt her suspicions solidify in her heart. The truth was a two-headed monster. On one side, the absence of mortal remains was a constant torment, the denial of the closure that society imposes upon the grieving. On the other, it was the seed of dangerous hope, the conviction that her children might somehow, inexplicably, still be alive. George, witnessing his wife's obstinacy, found in his own soul a resonance for this belief. He too could not reconcile the idea of total disintegration. The charred landscape where their home had once stood held no secrets, only absences. Tension in the small town of Fayetteville, already palpable since the tragedy, began to thicken with a new and sinister element, the appearance of anonymous letters. The first arrived weeks after the fire, an envelope with no return address, cheap paper and smudged ink. Inside, a concise message, composed of letters cut from newspapers: "Do not challenge what you don't understand." The threat was veiled, but the effect immediate. George felt a chill down his spine, a sense that hidden forces were at play, orchestrating a silence. Jenny, for her part, felt fear mixing with rage. Who would dare threaten them amid such pain?
Who knew something?
Other letters followed, some with the same somber and intimidating tone, others with a disturbingly different nature. One, handwritten in an elegant and unfamiliar script, mentioned intimate details about the children's lives. Small habits, phrases only the Sodder family would know. The main message, however, was always the same, implied or explicit: the children are well. Or, in another, they are being cared for. These letters, more than the threats, were a devastating blow. They reignited the flame of hope in an instant, only to plunge the parents back into an abyss of uncertainty the next. Who was sending them?
A mysterieux benefactor? A cruel torturé delighting in the Sodder anguish?
The police, when informed, dismissed them as hoaxes, the products of disturbed minds or attention seekers. But for George and Jenny, they were more than that. They were whispers from the abyss, and also echoes of life. While the authorities increasingly resisted any investigation that deviated from the narrative of a tragic accident, George and Jenny became the sole detectives in their own nightmare. They retraced every step of that fateful night, spoke with every neighbor, every acquaintance, every person who might have seen or heard something. And amid that desperate search, strange clues began to emerge, evidence the authorities had ignored, dismissed, or failed to pursue with due diligence. One such clue came from a woman who lived on the outskirts of Fayetteville. She approached Jenny with hesitation, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and compassion. She had seen, on the night of the fire, a speeding car not far from her house, near an abandoned quarry. Inside the vehicle, She swore she saw children, 5 of them. The description of the children in the car, their frightened faces and the pajamas they wore, bore an unsettling resemblance to the Sodder children. The woman had tried to report the incident to the police but was summarily dismissed. Her observations were labeled the product of imagination or exaggerated panic. For George and Jenny, however, the witness's account was a ray of light in the darkness, a validation of their growing suspicion of kidnapping. George tried to pressure the authorities to investigate the quarry, to search for footprints, any sign, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The official narrative had already been written. Another piece of the puzzle, even more irrefutable, involved the Sodder home's phone line. John, the eldest son, had been the first to notice the cut wire during the desperate attempt to call the fire department. The police, in their initial report, suggested that the fire might have melted or snapped the line. George, however, with his practical knowledge of mechanics and equipment, knew something was off. He called in an independent expert, a seasoned telephone technician, to examine what remained of the cable. The specialist's verdict was clear and categorical. The wire had been cut with a tool, pliers or wire cutters. It wasn't a break caused by fire, it was a clean, deliberate cut, intentional. This discovery, which should have been a turning point in the investigation, was likewise ignored by the authorities, who seemed determined to seal the case as a tragic and irreversible accident. For George, the evidence of the cut wire screamed a disturbing truth. Someone had premeditated the house's isolation, preventing a quick rescue, creating a window of opportunity for a sinister act. The most disturbing reports, however, came from neighbors and onlookers who had gathered at the scene of the fire. Several people, at different moments on that chaotic night, mentioned having seen strange figures, men dressed in uniforms resembling those of firefighters, but no one could identify them. They did not seem to be part of the local fire brigade. They acted peculiarly, without urgency, almost as if observing, or worse, controlling the situation. One neighbor swore he saw one of these firemen handling something near the house's fuse box before the flames had fully spread. Another reported overhearing a conversation between 2 of the men, in which one allegedly said, in a casual tone, "No need to rush, the children have already been removed." These observations, fragmented and difficult to verify in the confusion of that night, were likewise dismissed by the police as delusions of shocked witnesses. But for George and Jenny, they echoed each anonymous letter, each new piece of evidence suggesting that the tragedy had not been a mere accident. Years dragged on, turning acute pain into chronic anguish. George and Jenny dedicated their lives to the tireless search for their missing children. They spent fortunes, placed ads in newspapers across the country, hired private detectives, followed every lead, every rumor, every breath of hope. The house was rebuilt, but the home was never the same. The surviving children, John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia, grew up in the shadow of absence, witnesses to their parents' relentless grief. On every birthday of the missing siblings, every Christmas, every passing day, the wound reopened, but George and Jenny's determination never wavered. They refused to erect tombstones for the children, to acknowledge death without proof of their bodies. A billboard with the photos of the 5 missing children was posted along the main road in Fayetteville, a painful reminder for the community and a silent scream to the world. Decades passed. The world changed. World War II ended, the Cold War began, but the Sodders' search continued, relentless. Hope, though battered by time and the absence of concrete answers, never fully extinguished. And then, in 1967, 22 years after the tragedy, a mysterious envelope arrived at the Sodder house. Inside, there were no threats or empty promises, but a photograph. It was a photo of a young man, in his early 20s, with features eerily reminiscent of Louis Sodder, the 9-year-old who used to write in secret diaries. The image was in black and white, slightly faded, but the features were unmistakable. The nose, the jawline, the eyes that seemed to carry a familiar melancholy. On the back of the photo, a simple yet devastating handwritten message, Louis Sodder.
Il of Broder Frankie. Il boys.
A 90132 or 35. The discovery of Louis's photo, a young man who appeared to be their lost son, was a lightning bolt out of a clear sky. Hope, which had become a thin, nearly invisible thread, suddenly turned into a thick rope, pulling them back into the abyss of uncertainty and into the possibility that everything they had feared and hoped for was real. Jenny, holding the photo in her hands, felt her heart beat with a force she hadn't felt in decades. It was him. She was sure. George, seeing the image, felt a knot in his throat, a mix of joy and terror. If Lewis was alive, where were the others? Who had raised him? Who had sent the photo? Was it a sign that the truth was finally about to be revealed, or just another piece in the cruel game that had tormented their lives for so long? The photo of Lewis brought no answers, but reignited the flame of the search with renewed intensity, casting new light and a new shadow on the mystery of the missing Sodder children. Uncertainty hung thicker than ever, as the family prepared to face a new chapter in their long and dark odyssey. The charred remains of the Sodder home lay like a gaping necrotic wound on the Fayetteville landscape, a constant, grim reminder of the inferno that had consumed not just wood and stone, but, according to official decree, 5 young lives. Yet, for George and Jenny Sodder, the silence that followed the initial chaos was far more terrifying than any scream, more enduring than any flame. It was the chilling, suffocating silence of an unresolved end, a void that defied the finality of death. Their grief was not a quiet sorrow, a descent into resigned acceptance, but a restless, defiant torment that refused to be appeased by platitudes or closed cases. Every breath was a struggle against the suffocating weight of the unknown, every waking moment a silent plea for answers that never came. Their nights were haunted by phantom cries and the acrid smell of smoke, their days by an oppressive sense of injustice and the spectral presence of their missing children. Months bled into a year, then 2, yet the ache in Jenny's chest remained raw, an unceasing throb, the phantom weight of her children's small bodies still heavy in her arms.
George, a man forged of coal dust and stern resolve, felt agnoing antines, a coldrage simring beneat his stoic exterior.
The official explanation, that their children had perished in the blaze and their remains utterly consumed by the inferno's impossible heat, was a lie they would not, swallow. The lack of bones, the conspicuous absence of any conclusive human remains beyond a few scattered fragments that could not be definitively linked to the children, fueled their certainty. Their children were gone, yes, but not in the manner the authorities insisted. A chilling, unspoken truth clawed at their minds, a terrifying whisper that grew louder with each passing day. Their children were missing, abducted, spirited away into the night, not incinerated. This profound conviction, born of intuition and the unsettling gaps in the official narrative, became the bedrock of their existence, an obsessive force that would redefine their lives. This unshakable belief manifested in a defiant, monumental act that would brand their unrelenting search onto the very fabric of their community. On their sprawling property, strategically positioned to face the bustling main road, George and Jenny began to erect a structure that would become a living monument to their anguish and their fierce refusal to surrender. It was not a headstone, for they had no graves to mark, no bodies to inter, but a towering billboard. Carpenters, their faces etched with a mixture of sympathy and bewilderment, worked under George's meticulous, unyielding eye, bolting together towering wooden planks, raising a vast canvas against the indifferent West Virginia sky. The local community whispered, some in genuine sympathy for the Sodders' unfathomable loss, others in disbelief at what they perceived as an increasingly irrational, all-consuming obsession. "They need to move on," some would murmur, shaking their heads. "It's been too long." Yet, the Sodders pressed on, deaf to the murmurs, blind to the skeptical glances, driven by a force far stronger than public opinion or societal expectation. Their determination was a silent scream against the world's complacency. Finally, it stood, a colossal, inescapable declaration of their torment. Painted in stark, bold black letters against a stark white background, above 5 meticulously rendered, almost lifelike portraits of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were the words that echoed their desperate eternal plea, "Living or dead, help us know the truth." The billboard was more than just an advertisement. It was a testament to their unyielding hope, a giant, public wound laid bare for all to see. It was a defiant beacon for truth, a silent accusation against a world that had moved on, while their own had shattered into a million unsolved pieces. Day and night, through scorching summers and bitter winters, under the glare of the relentless sun and the cold gaze of the moon, the faces of their children gazed out from the massive wooden frame, their innocent eyes silently questioning, endlessly waiting. The billboard transformed their home into a strange pilgrimage site for the curious, the genuinely sympathetic, and the inexplicably cruel. A deluge of letters began to arrive, a torrent of paper that promised answers but delivered only heartache. Each morning, the mailbox groaned under the weight of envelopes, each one a potential key to the mystery, or a cruel twist of the knife. Some offered genuine condolences, heartfelt expressions of sorrow from strangers who had read of their plight and felt a pang of shared humanity. Others shared stories of their own lost loved ones, finding a strange, kindred spirit in the Sodders' unique and devastating plight. But far too many were malicious, filled with twisted taunts, sick jokes, or absurd, easily debunked claims that only served to mock their pain. Anonymous notes hinted at dark conspiracies, whispered of secret societies and shadowy figures, while others, more chillingly, boasted with chilling detail of the children's alleged whereabouts, their words dripping with a sick, perverse satisfaction, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. These were the hardest to bear, the ones that exploited their deepest fears, playing a cruel game with their fragile hope. Each envelope, regardless of its content, held a fleeting promise, a flicker of hope that was invariably extinguished by the cold, unforgiving light of reality. Jenny spent countless hours sifting through them, her fingers stained with ink, her eyes often blurring with unshed tears, her spirit repeatedly bruised, yet she never stopped. Every lead, no matter how remote, how improbable, or how obviously fabricated, was meticulously documented, filed, and often pursued with a desperate urgency. She kept a meticulous log, a ledger of sorrow and false dawns, detailing every name, every address, every claim, hoping that somewhere within the chaos of misinformation, a single thread of truth might emerge. George, driven by a primal, relentless paternal urge, became a tireless seeker, a modern-day phantom pursuing ghosts. He traveled ceaselessly, a grim specter haunting the desolate backroads and bustling city streets across state lines, chasing every whisper, every scrap of information. He followed cryptic tips to remote farmhouses hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains, knocking on doors that opened to reveal frightened, bewildered families who denied any knowledge. He entered the sterile, unsettling corridors of mental institutions, his heart hammering with a dreadful mix of dread and hope, only to find patients whose rambling declarations proved to be nothing more than the products of tormented minds, lost in their own internal labyrinths. He interviewed countless strangers, from transient workers to corruptible law enforcement officials in other jurisdictions, his voice hoarse from endless questions, his spirit slowly eroded by repeated disappointments. Each journey was a pilgrimage of pain, a descent into an abyss of false promises and agonizing dead ends. He endured long, lonely drives, sleeping in cheap motels, eating cold, tasteless meals, his mind constantly replaying the inferno, re-examining every detail, every oversight. He met with psychics, charlatans, and genuine but ultimately unhelpful investigators. The cost was immense, both financially, depleting his once thriving coal transportation business, and emotionally, scarring his very soul. Yet, George refused to count it. What price, he reasoned, could one possibly put on truth, on the lives of 5 innocent souls? His quest became his entire existence, eclipsing everything else. Jenny's search, though less visible to the outside world, was no less relentless, no less profound. Her dedication was interwoven with deeply personal rituals of remembrance and a quiet, desperate, almost mystical faith. Every Christmas Eve, long after the surviving children, John, Marion, George Jr., and little Sylvia, had drifted off to uneasy sleep, their own young lives shaped irrevocably by the family's perpetual vigil, Jenny would carry a single flickering candle to the living room. She would place it carefully, reverently, beneath the sole surviving photograph of Louis, his small, earnest face illuminated by the dancing flame. Louis, the quiet observer, the secret keeper, whose small diaries, filled with his childhood thoughts and innocent observations, were now forever lost, or perhaps hidden with him. It was a silent vigil, a mother's prayer whispered into the quiet, cold night, a defiant act against the brutal finality of his supposed death. She hoped that wherever he was, wherever they were, the tiny, persistent light would somehow pierce the darkness and guide them home, a beacon across an impossible distance. Among her most treasured and most haunting possessions was a small, clean child's shoe. It had been found amidst the ashes and debris of the burnt-out home, miraculously untouched by the inferno's destructive embrace that had supposedly devoured everything. This tiny artifact, belonging to one of her children, perhaps Louis, perhaps Jenny, was more than just a relic. It was a sacred, physical tether to the inexplicable, a tangible piece of a puzzle whose other parts remained tantalizingly out of reach. She kept it in a velvet pouch, often pulling it out, tracing its soft, supple leather with her fingertips, as if by touch she could unravel the mystery woven into its very threads. It was proof, she believed with every fiber of her being, that not everything had been destroyed, that a piece of her children had survived the inferno, just as she knew they had. The shoe was a persistent whisper from the past, a silent promise of answers that remained stubbornly, agonizingly out of reach. It was the last, most potent symbol of their continued existence, a testament to the unproven theory that the children had walked out of the house, alive, leaving this single, poignant clue behind. The years blurred into decades, marked not by milestones or celebrations, but by the relentless, all-consuming pursuit of an impossible truth. The Sodder family, once vibrant, bustling, and full of life, became irrevocably defined by their tragedy and their unwavering, almost fanatical quest. The billboard stood sentinel, weathering countless storms and seasons, its paint gradually fading, its stark message growing more poignant and desperate with the inexorable passage of time. The faces of the children, once bright and full of innocent hope, slowly transformed into solemn, almost spectral visages on the aging canvas, yet their eyes still held the power to haunt, to accuse, to plead. The endless letters, the futile journeys, the quiet, melancholic rituals, all became interwoven, part of a somber, unraveling tapestry woven with threads of diminishing hope and ever-present despair. The mystery of the missing Sodder children remained a gaping, festering wound in the very heart of Fayetteville, a testament to a grief so profound, so unyielding, that it defied the passage of time and the comforting, yet elusive, logic of closure. For George and Jenny, there would be no peace, no respite from their internal torment, no true rest, until the truth, however painful, however terrifying, finally emerged from the impenetrable shadows that had swallowed their children whole. Their lives had become an endless search, a testament to a love that refused to die, even in the face of an agonizing, chilling, and utterly inexplicable silence. The phantom screams of their missing children echoed not just in their minds, but in every empty room of their home, every unanswered question, every unfulfilled hope. Their journey was one of unending sorrow, a relentless descent into a mystery that offered no solace, only deeper, darker questions. The relentless pursuit of truth had etched itself onto George Sodder's very being. Each passing year since that horrific Christmas Eve in 1945 did not dull the edge of his pain, but rather sharpened it into a constant, gnawing agony. The initial shock had given way to a quiet, consuming obsession. He became a spectral figure, haunting the edges of forgotten leads, his life defined by the absence of his children. He traveled tirelessly, a gaunt, determined shadow, from the remote hollows of West Virginia to the bustling avenues of Washington, D.C., seeking audience with anyone who might offer a flicker of insight. Politicians, investigators, psychics, even alleged mediums. No stone was left unturned in his desperate quest. Every anonymous tip, no matter how dubious, ignited a fleeting spark of hope, only to be extinguished by the cold reality of yet another dead end. The billboard on Route 16, a monumental testament to his unwavering conviction, stood as a silent, weather-beaten sentinel, its faded faces a perpetual reminder to a world that had largely moved on. But George could not move on. He was tethered to that night, to the screams he heard, to the promises he made to himself. His once robust frame grew fragile, his eyes, once alight with the spark of an entrepreneur, now held the haunted gaze of a man eternally searching for what was lost. The laughter that had once filled his home, the boisterous energy of his 5 vanished children, had been replaced by a silence so profound it echoed in the very foundations of his existence. He sifted through old reports, meticulously organized newspaper clippings, and revisited the charred site of his former home countless times, as if the earth itself might finally yield its secrets. The official declaration of accidental death by fire was a cruel, bureaucratic pronouncement, a dismissal of a father's agony, a narrative he vehemently rejected until his final breath. He believed, with an unwavering conviction, that his children had been taken, not consumed by the inferno. In 1969, 24 years after the fire, George Sodder, a man defined by a mystery no one seemed willing to solve, succumbed to the relentless march of time. His heart, battered by hope and despair, finally gave out under the crushing weight of an unfulfilled quest. He died without ever knowing the true fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, leaving behind a legacy of desperate, unyielding love, and an unbearable void that no passage of time could ever fill. His passing was not a closure, but merely another chapter in the story of an unresolved torment, a testament to how deeply a single, horrific event could scar the landscape of a family's existence. If George's search was a public crusade, Jenny's was a quieter, yet no less fierce, crucible of unwavering determination. Her grief, unlike George's open anguish, simmered beneath a veil of steely resolve, hardening her spirit against the indifference of the world. She carried the torch of their shared quest with a profound, almost spiritual conviction that her children lived, somewhere, somehow. The initial shock and devastation had morphed into an unshakable belief, a mother's instinct that defied all logic and evidence presented by the authorities. Jenny maintained the iconic billboard, ensuring its visibility, a beacon in the pervasive darkness, a constant, silent scream against the forgotten narrative. Her days became a meticulous ritual of revisiting old leads, meticulously cataloging every tip, no matter how outlandish, and endlessly sifting through the earth at the former homestead. Her fingers digging into the soil as if the very answers might spontaneously manifest from the haunted ground. She corresponded tirelessly, her letters filled with eloquent pleas and unshakable certainty, to countless psychics, government officials, and anyone who would listen to her desperate appeals. She lived for the children she believed were out there, somewhere waiting to be found, their faces etched into her memory, their laughter echoing in the quiet corners of her mind. Her life was a testament to enduring maternal love, a refusal to surrender to the convenient narrative of an accidental fire. Yet, the decades were merciless. The youthful vigor that had fueled her early search began to wane, replaced by the weary gait of age, the deep lines etched into her face reflecting a lifetime of unanswered questions. Still, her eyes retained a glint of defiance, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. There was a particular unsettling ritual that marked Jenny's final years, a small, sealed matchbox, its contents a closely guarded secret, always clutched in her hand or kept beneath her pillow. Its worn exterior hinted at untold stories, a final unspoken testament to a truth she carried alone, a whisper of a secret too profound to share. What lay within that humble container remained a mystery, a final poignant piece of the Sodder enigma. In 1989, a full 20 years after George's passing, Jenny Sodder, a woman whose life had been a tireless vigil, followed him into the great unknown. She was buried, as per her quiet, firm instruction, with the mysterious matchbox tucked within her grasp, resting against her heart, a final, cryptic whisper from a woman who defied despair until her very last breath. The earth took her, but the question she carried, embedded deep within her soul and perhaps within that small, wooden container, remained, haunting the very fabric of Fayetteville's memory. The year 1993, long after the collective memory of Fayetteville had tried to bury its most disturbing tragedy, brought a fleeting, chilling flicker of unsettling truth. Decades after the inferno, the ordinary hum of municipal work disturbed the quietude near the overgrown, long-abandoned site where the Sodder home once stood. A routine drainage project, an unglamorous endeavor to improve local infrastructure, commenced, oblivious to the spectral history embedded in the soil. The rhythmic churn of earth-moving equipment, initially a mundane sound, began to disturb not just the earth, but the very fabric of forgotten history. On a crisp autumn morning, a backhoe operator, accustomed to unearthing nothing more than rocks, roots, and the occasional forgotten artifact, felt his heavy machine strike something unexpectedly unyielding. A metallic thud echoed through the trench. Curious, he dismounted, joining his crewmates in the muddy, freshly excavated trench. There, partially obscured by damp earth and tangled roots, lay a small metal box, corroded by decades of subterranean existence but remarkably intact. Its primitive construction suggested an intentional burial, not a haphazard loss. A palpable hush fell over the workers as they carefully, almost reverently, pried open its resistant lid. What lay inside was not treasure, but something far more profound and terrifying. Nestled amongst layers of compacted dirt and fine debris were three objects, each a silent, haunting scream from a past violently suppressed. First, a tiny, exquisitely preserved infant shoe, its delicate form unmistakably belonging to a very young child, a poignant echo of Betty or Jenny Sodder. Second, a small, dark lock of human hair, unmistakably black and fine, as distinct as the raven's wing, hinting at the vibrant life it once adorned. And most chillingly, the very same photograph of a young man, appearing to be in his early 20s, that George and Jenny had received decades earlier. The one they had clung to as proof that Louis Sodder, their 9-year-old son, had survived and grown into adulthood. The air grew heavy, thick with the unbearable weight of this impossible discovery. The workers, though likely unversed in the intimate, horrific specifics of the old tragedy, instinctively grasped its profound, unsettling significance. This was not a mere historical artifact. It was a ghost made tangible, a fragment of a truth violently suppressed, a physical manifestation of the Sodder family's enduring torment. Word, as it always does in small towns, spread quickly, reaching the ears of a site supervisor. His arrival was swift, his demeanor brusque, his eyes holding an unreadable coldness. Without a single word, without explanation or visible hesitation, he confiscated the metal box and its haunting contents. His movements were deliberate, almost clinical, as he swept the evidence away. He dismissed the stunned workers with an air of absolute finality, ensuring no photographs were taken, no further questions asked, no official report filed. The discovery, a potential seismic shift in the narrative, was absorbed into the silence, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the same shadow that had consumed the children decades prior. The incident, a momentary rupture in the carefully constructed facade of an accident, left behind only a lingering unease, a gnawing suspicion of a truth deliberately buried, not by the passage of time, but by the calculated hand of human intervention, a chilling continuation of the cover-up that began that fateful night. The Sodder case, an enduring enigma woven into the fabric of American true crime history, remains an open wound, officially closed and filed away as a domestic accident. This bureaucratic pronouncement stands in stark, chilling contrast to the total absence of physical evidence. No bodies, no remains, no definitive proof of a fire's ferocity capable of incinerating 5 young children without a trace. The official narrative, a flimsy construct built on conjecture and convenient dismissal, crumbled under the slightest scrutiny from those who dared to look closer, yet it persisted, enforced by a pervasive silence that spoke volumes of complicity or willful ignorance. The absence of bodies, the most cruel and unrelenting of all outcomes, denied George and Jenny the fundamental human right of complete mourning. There was no grave to visit, no physical anchor for their immeasurable grief, only an endless, aching void filled with agonizingly unanswered questions. This void, this relentless ambiguity, allowed the story to fester, to transcend mere local lore to become a chilling legend whispered in the dark corners of West Virginia, and eventually across the nation. The authorities, by their inexplicable inaction, their steadfast refusal to reopen the case despite overwhelming inconsistencies, and their outright suppression of new evidence, inadvertently ensured its immortality. Their silence, far from burying the truth, provided fertile ground for rampant speculation, for theories ranging from calculated kidnapping to organized crime, each more disturbing than the last. The Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, swallowed by the flames of that terrifying Christmas Eve, never truly vanished from the collective consciousness. Their story, a profound testament to an unyielding parental love in the face of insurmountable odds and a chilling governmental indifference, continues burning even decades after the original flames died down. It burns in the hearts of those who remember, in the persistent whispers of a mystery unsolved, a truth deliberately obscured. It resonates with the chilling realization that some questions, especially those entangled with power, silence, and the convenient rewriting of history, never find just answers. Their echoes linger, haunting, through generations, a somber reminder that sometimes the deepest darkness isn't in the roaring inferno, but in the impenetrable shadows cast by an unacknowledged truth. The Sodder family's tragedy serves as a grim, eternal beacon, illuminating the terrifying possibility that justice, for some, remains an elusive, unattainable dream, forever trapped in the ashes of a forgotten fire. The Sodder family case isn't just a story of fire and loss. It's a chilling testament to the human struggle against the unknown. It forces us to confront a terrifying possibility, that some truths are simply swallowed whole, leaving behind only the agonizing void of what-ifs. What is more unsettling, to know a terrible end, or to be forever haunted by the absence of one? The unresolved nature of this tragedy lingers like a cold breath, a stark reminder that even the most relentless pursuit of answers can sometimes lead only to deeper questions, leaving an indelible mark of dread on history. What are your thoughts on the Sodder disappearance? Do you believe the children perished in the flames, or do you subscribe to another, perhaps darker, theory? Share your insights and reflections in the comments below. And if the chilling mysteries of our world captivate you, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the shadows of the past. Until our next descent into the unknown, stay vigilant.